Hey guys, how are we doing? Just checking the audio. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. What's up,
Awesome.
everyone?
Sweet, fantastic. Thanks, guys.
Hey, that video was deep, Tim. It was awesome.
Yeah, yeah. It's a draft one at the moment. We're just waiting for clearance on the music at the moment, but yeah, it gives you a shape of what we're doing. So yeah. Now Vanessa is going to be joining us as well. She's our chair, and she's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. So she's a global expert in Indigenous well-being and suicide prevention, and has worked with the UN and all that sort of thing. So I think she'll be able to bring in some really nice layers relating to how the Indigenous communities might be viewing this. So are you happy for her to come up as a speaker as well?
Sure, absolutely. If anybody wants to raise their hand, come on up. I'll pull you up as a speaker. Vanessa, if you're in the room, if you want to go ahead and raise your hand, I'll pull you up.
I think
We'll just fill up a little bit.
she's literally sitting next to me, but she's just connecting right now. So she should be in there any second now. So, but you know, I guess in the initial stages of the describing the project, I'll probably be the main voice piece, I guess. But I think Vanessa will bring some fantastic stuff up.
Excellent.
No, if you go to the
If you're just joining us, hello, this is Chimp Tank. Season 1, Episode 4. We have Tim Lee, our guest, talking about NFTs for good, guys. We'll let it fill up a little bit and let some people fall in for a couple of minutes here. And then if you'd like to speak or get up on the stage, any Blue Chimps or Vanessa, go ahead and raise your hand. I'll pull you right up. That way we can get the show on the road.
There's
Please,
Vanessa.
you want to
Vanessa's
make me a co-host, and then I'll help you out?
Oh my gosh, what's up with gas? It's like 20 grand right now.
Yeah, it's insane. The other day was like 500. Then I tried again. It was 700. I just gave up.
Yeah, I literally was just trying to buy a piece, and it's like 19,000 just for gas.
Oh, the gas just really sucks, guys. It's such a pain in the ass, isn't it? Vanessa's just arrived. You can probably see Vanessa Lee Armat. So if you guys can make her a speaker, that'll be great, and then we can bring her up when she's when there's some good things to talk about. Fantastic, guys. Thank you.
Okay, if you're just joining us, we're going to be letting it fill up a little bit. Give it a couple of minutes. Let everybody fall in. If you'd like to join us up on stage, we're going to be talking with Tim Lee, NFTs for Good. Mr. Alpha is what I call him. Anytime I hear Tim in a room, he's absolutely just full of knowledge. Very thankful to have him tonight on Chimp Tank, Season 1, Episode 4. Chimp Tank is where we talk to creators throughout the space about their NFTs, and we help NFT creators get off the ground floor with community help, community building, sometimes financial assistance, whatever it may be. That's all done right here on the Chimp Tank. So just give it a couple of minutes and we'll get this show on the road.
Just want to say a big thank you to the Blue Chimps again for organising this Chimp Tank. I think the whole concept and idea is fantastic, and I've been in a couple of them and have really enjoyed them. So thank you again for the invites. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm glad I got to hop in that space that night and meet you, Tim. And you said it's been a pleasure definitely listening to you.
To my BS, is that what you've been listening to? Is that what it is?
Yeah, not hardly. We call you Mr. Alpha for a reason.
Yeah, it's either Alpha or Alfa Romeo. I don't quite know which one it is. Or, well, no, not Alfa Romeo. I think I'm too old in the tooth to be an Alfa Romeo, I think. But I'll take that very graciously. But thank you. But I appreciate it.
Yes.
Where's that accent from?
Tim, I think someone's asking you about your accent. I believe I've heard you say it's Australian before. So.
Yes. Well, I'm originally from the UK, so from a place on the south coast called Brighton. And came out to Australia 20 years ago, and have never looked back. It's a great place to live, absolutely sensational place to live. I mean, just to put it in perspective, in Sydney, which is where I'm based, there are 27 beaches, and there are more swimming,
Wow.
more 50-meter outdoor swimming pools than there are in the entire United Kingdom, just in Sydney. It's that sort of outdoor lifestyle, which is very appealing to a lot of people. So it's and myself included, having lived for way too many years in freezing cold weather and rain and 6 weather systems fighting to compete every single day of the year, which just means that's why a lot of British people are really creative, because they're stuck inside all the time and they have to sort of sit around the fire and come up with ideas, which is great. And maybe I'm losing that. Maybe I'm getting too soft. I don't know. But yeah.
No, we love our British brothers and sisters for sure. Okay, guys, we'll get the show on the road. Looks like we've got quite a few, right over 30. So if everybody could do me a favor before we start, just go to the right, the little blue tab with the feather on the bottom right hand side, and share this space. Please share this space, and we'll get this show on the road. Tim Lee, talking about his project NFTs for Good. Tim, thank you for coming on the Blue Chimps. Can you tell us, just give us the 1-minute elevator breakdown, and then we can get a little bit more in depth about your project, if that's possible.
Awesome. Look, I just want to say thanks again to the Blue Chimps for the invite, and Vanessa, who's our chair, who's up on stage as well, for the invite. Basically, Walking Between Worlds is the actual project, and we are our mission is to actually energize Indigenous communities globally to capitalize on the NFT space. For far too long, they've been, as communities, First Nation communities have been disenfranchised. And it's very much because there's a massive digital divide that exists. We actually want to empower First Nation voices to actually take advantage of NFTs, because frankly, I think in the past 2 years, the world's been ravaged by pandemic, and it's just caused a lot of us to actually rethink what we're doing. And I think Indigenous voices have got so much purity and clarity. And for example, in Australia, the Indigenous community here is over 50,000 years old. It's the oldest civilization on the planet. And we're trying to put together the oldest civilization on the planet with the latest bleeding edge technology. And that's not always easy, but that's the objective.
Excellent. So you're coming up with an NFT line that is basically geared towards helping Indigenous people around the world. Which, Tim, I gotta tell you, I've seen other efforts. I think Facebook did a big push to try to pass out tablets and create internet. I think at one time they had like airplanes or satellites driving around with internet signals. Like, they've done a lot to try to bridge that gap, so to speak. How has the pandemic helped in that, where everything went online? Do you think that kind of helped the divide a little bit, the pandemic situation?
Well, I think with the pandemic, digitization has just mushroomed. If we just look at how Zoom has taken over, just digitization overall. Even the internet of value expressed through cryptocurrencies have really just taken off. So everything has ramped up from a digital perspective. Now, within the Indigenous communities, generally speaking, they are now, in general, as First Nations people, embracing mobile phones much more. And it's really interesting, and Vanessa can talk more to this at the appropriate time, but we did a webinar yesterday for Indigenous creatives and artists, and one of the things that came out is that the elders of the Indigenous communities are really deep into Facebook right now. And because, in Australia, for example, it's about 3/4 the size of the United States, all right, to put it in perspective in terms of size. But there's 26 million people, as compared to, 325 million. And the Indigenous communities here in Australia are about 751,000 altogether. And the communities generally tend to be very disparately spread out across Australia. So the way that families can actually connect at a deeper level has actually been through Facebook. And it really staggered me that a lot of the elders, the grandfathers, the grandmothers, the aunties, the uncles, they're all on Facebook. It's ramped up over the past the past 2 years or so. So I think everybody is actually experiencing the move to digitization, and the indigenous communities globally will embrace it more. And I mean, certainly, it's about. But to work with digital art and to work with the digital tools, you need to have the core basics of understanding how computers work, and if it's Windows or Mac or whatever it might be. And there's just a deep digital divide that exists. It will improve. But if we can actually provide the focal point to actually be able to sell great art via NFTs, what that means is, by virtue of the fact that we're channeling that energy and knowledge into an objective, what it means is, by osmosis, the digital learnings and digital experiences will actually be developed. And certainly, as with the project that we're working with, we've got two core stages, because we've got 3 collections coming out. The first collection's on January the 14th. It's 1,100 pieces. The second collection is 3,300, which will be different indigenous artists and a different theme. That'll be coming out at the end of February, and then 5,500 at the end of March. Now that's to actually build community engagement, because the bigger objective is to actually create a community token by which we can actually empower global indigenous communities. Because what we're doing is seek to create a playbook out of Australia and then make that available for the Inuits in Canada, Native Americans in the US, the Mayans in Guatemala, etc., and through growth partners in those particular communities, expand the learnings and the platform that we're looking towards putting together, to actually help those communities. So it's very much, the first 3 collections are about community engagement, and then it's about the actual platform, which drives 4 key areas of empowerment. And what those are, the first thing is collaboration, because if there's a digital divide, we want digital artists to be able to work with traditional artists that work with oil and canvas. The second element is digital education. So we're partnering with a couple of education providers, plus a number of universities here in Australia to begin with. And the third element is about creating best-in-class galleries within the metaverse, the decentralized, the sandbox, the crypto voxels, that actually showcase indigenous art. And the fourth area of empowerment is to actually bring models into the equation that support art investors to get behind emerging talent. And so that platform structure has to be funded by a wholesale investor structure rather than through retail. And I can talk more about that sort of side at a later stage in terms of the regulatory considerations that we're looking at. But it's very much 2 stages: community engagement, then platform development, with the idea that once the beta version of the platform goes live, we can then put the cryptocurrency, the community token, onto the cryptocurrency exchanges. That's the proposed way in which we're doing things.
That's excellent, Tim. What a great explanation. I'm going to reset the room, and then I'll open it up for any questions from any chimps. Again, this is Chimp Tank. Welcome everybody who's in the audience listening. This is Chimp Tank Season 1, Episode 4. We have Tim Lee with NFTs for Good. Tim Lee is a regular throughout the spaces. He's always bringing the alpha. I love joining spaces where he's speaking. We're happy to have him here tonight on the Chimp Tank talking about NFTs for Good. Chimp Tank, again, if this is your first time joining, is a weekly podcast right here on Twitter live, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, where we talk to developers throughout the space. So, Tim, thanks for the explanation. Do we have any chimps that have any questions at this point for Tim?
Yeah, actually, I do. Let me kind of jump in here first. I know Iron, I got to get him in before he gets started. So, but I think most of my questions revolve around the token. I guess you basically, if I understand you correctly, this will be a governance token. Is that correct? And also, I guess the other question I have is, what do you see the major challenge that you have right now to bridge that gap between, technology and being able to reach out into this indigenous community and be able to have this certain type of infrastructure that's needed in order to bring, the new technology NFTs to one of the oldest, population, whatever word I'm thinking of, having a lapse of memory here, but, to this 50,000-year-old indigenous community.
That's a great question, Cryptomaniac, and really appreciate you asking it. I mean, the first point is very much on the token structure. We are first of all trying to make sure that we're within the regulatory guidelines and framework that will keep us legal. That's the key thing, because we're playing with, not playing, that's the wrong way of saying, but we're working with funds that are going to be so empowering that we just we can't afford to screw up, to be honest. So the collections will represent NFTs, but we are looking at ways in which a community token will be developed, and there will be a governance structure based around that with a DAO coming out. But it'll be a community token, and the idea is this: that the mission is to energize global indigenous communities to capitalize on the NFT space. And if there are digital artists, teachers, whatever they might be, if they're willing, able to join the community to drive that mission, everybody drives in the same direction. And if that behavior can be rewarded with a community-based token, what that actually means, it's a utility-based structure. Now, of course, with communities, the value of the community will be determined by the community itself plus external views of that. So I can't under the SEC guidelines or ASIG or the FCA guidelines talk about any guarantee of increase in value, but it's down to the community to attribute value to that element. And so it's a community token, and I would just use the visual metaphor, which is one that I've used in many pitches that I've spoken at over time, and that is, in the UK you tend to see it where you see birds fly south for the winter where they go to find warmer climes, and I know you see it in the States. In Australia we don't see it because I think it's too hot down here as it stands at the moment, but you see birds fly in a V formation, and that V formation, nature determines that if a flock of geese fly in a V formation, the flock as a whole will actually fly 71% further than they would as individuals. And it's all to do with aerodynamics and everybody going in the same direction. So if you think of that metaphor of here's the mission to energize indigenous communities, if there are parties and people that really want to get behind this project, we're looking at a structure that will reward appropriate behavior with community-based tokens. And the idea is the more that the community succeeds, the more energization of indigenous communities there are, the more indigenous art that will come out, the more that revenues will be generated by the token structure. And so it's very much more a utility token, Cryptomaniac, rather than specifically a governance token, although there is a governance structure that is being built into that. Hopefully that gives you an explanation.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that. And on the second question is, what do you see your biggest challenges in bridging that gap between the community and this, with technology?
Okay, well, what I'm going to, I'll give my perspective, then I'd love to just bring Vanessa up for a couple of minutes to talk about her perspective. Vanessa is an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander woman and a global specialist in Indigenous well-being. And certainly, we've got a team of 10 working on this project. Everybody's working pro bono ahead of actually, the collections coming out and the funding hopefully coming through for the community token. So as a white, middle-aged Englishman, I am the wrong person to be driving this to Indigenous communities who are actually suffering from the legacy of colonial imperialism that's happened across the globe, all right? Now, it doesn't mean that that I can't have a say, because of course, I've been in the blockchain space since 2015. So I've been around the traps, I've seen the good, the bad, and the indifferent. But it's very much working with Indigenous specialists, and that, Vanessa Lee, who's going to come up in a second, is a cultural broker, and so she's deeply committed to energizing and empowering Indigenous communities, and she's worked with multiple Indigenous communities in her travels. And perhaps if you're okay with it, I'll be great for Vanessa just to sort of take over from there as to where she sees the challenges, bearing in mind that she's dealing with the Indigenous community all the time. Is that okay with you guys?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Go ahead. Welcome, Vanessa.
I'm still a listener.
No, you're a speaker. You're a speaker there.
Oh, okay.
Okay, all right. Well,
I'll talk on yours.
Okay.
So the biggest challenge with the Camels communities, but before I start, guys, hello everybody, and thank you for welcoming me.
Oh, hang on a sec. We may have a bit of a feedback loop. Sorry, because Vanessa's on her phone is showing as a listener, so I'm just trying to. We're just trying to.
I think your speaker is open. Just go ahead or mute your mic.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
GM Vanessa, how are you? Welcome to the Chimp Tank.
Thank you for the invitation. Working with communities, I'll just say this: working with Indigenous communities, and I've worked with Indigenous communities all over the world, across different platforms, doing that cultural broker role, where I work with either government or large organisations and link them back through to Indigenous communities. One of the challenges I'm finding with working here back in Australia with doing this project with Walking Between Worlds is the lack of knowledge of, and this, you've said this before, is that lack of knowledge of data and what is an NFT and how do we work with NFTs. The interesting thing is that people are not afraid to ask the questions, and people are not afraid to be part of the solution. And we're working with a group of artists. We're very, very excited. The other challenge is that some artists can't afford, say, a simple thing as a computer or an iPad. And for doing digital work, you need either or. So they only have their mobile phone. So that is also another challenge. But like I said, we're working with that as well, and we're looking at solutions through things like the arts councils and other digital spaces to see where we can get more iPads and work with arts centres within communities to see how we can also link that together so that the art centres actually have the ownership of the iPads and the artists can come in and do their work. So we're finding solutions to the challenges. And the fact that there's been COVID has actually been in our favour because people know how to use the digital space to communicate. And it's forced people to use their phones in a different way, to use the internet in a different way. So we're finding that solution to the problem everywhere we go. And now it's at that point where people are telling each other. Other artists are passing it on, passing on to another artist what we're doing and the power in our solution to actually empower communities and empower Indigenous people globally. I really want to put that out there. Like, we've got the solution to the challenge.
And I'll just add one little bit of a layer to that. I think in some ways, I mean, in terms of I've spoken individually with quite a number of Indigenous artists, and I've also spoken with a lot of traditional artists that are sort of white and have been in the digital space and have worked with digital art. And I have found that with traditional white, and I hate using this demarcation, but it's really for the sake of clarity. I found with traditional white artists that are already fairly familiar with the tools, it takes about 45 minutes to get them to a comfortable position to say, okay, I'm ready to go and explore more. With those conversations with individual Indigenous artists overall, that conversation's between 2 and 3 hours. generally speaking. Now, it doesn't become scalable to do that for every single artist. So
can I jump in?
Sorry, yeah, go on.
And that's after I've done all the work first and I've done all the connection.
Yeah.
And then I do the first stage of that community engagement and all the connection, and then I pass them over to Ian and Tim, and then Tim still has that 3-hour conversation.
Yeah. So one of the things that we're doing with the collection pieces, 30% of the revenues will actually go to Indigenous-based charities that are chosen by the artists, and that's a really important feature that we'll come back to in a second. But it's the idea that the artists can actually, through their work, generate value for their communities, because the Indigenous community are about community, and I will definitely let Vanessa talk on that side in a second. But it's really important so that, for example, one of the artists that we're working with is very keen to try and buy 12 iPads to make them available for his community so he can teach kids how to do digital art. And from that side, that becomes so powerful. If an artist that has put themselves out there and has actually produced pieces that are NFTs in this space, they are actually creating thought leadership in their communities. And that's really, really powerful. But perhaps if I just get Vanessa just to give that sense of how powerful community is for Indigenous communities, because in the crypto community, we always talk about community. In the NFT community, we always talk about community. But I would love just to get Vanessa just to tell you how a civilization that's 50,000 years old has embraced community.
So it comes back to collective. Every decision, every piece, every thought process and everything is about a collective. Where do you stand in that collective, in the kinship system? And the kinship system is about what it means basically is if you're born an only child, you're actually never an only child, because the rest of your kin are your mums and dads and aunties and uncles and so forth. If they're your brothers and sisters, like if your dad has all the brothers and sisters, they're also part of your parent line, same with your mum. And so you're never left alone. And so that whole sense of community is installed from birth. So when we bring the Indigenous artists that we're working with into our community, because this is our stepping stones, right? So the first step was I always say to people, like, come and join our community, and this is who we are with Walking Between Worlds. And I make sure it's complete, transparency is key, as we all know with NFTs. Thank goodness. Thank you. And and that's really powerful in this space, and an important piece. Because when I say to them, look, this is what had happened. So there was an Aboriginal artist, for instance, she sold a piece many years ago, and the piece she was on Google looking for something, and the person who bought the piece then turned her artwork into a wallpaper for a resort in Poland. And it was just that she happened to be on Google looking for something else, and you know how Google puts that thing up, so people have also viewed this, and so she recognised her artwork, and then she went and studied law and took that company to court and won. And the interesting thing is, when I tell her story and I've explained this to her, I said, had your piece been an NFT, we would have already tracked it. We would already know who was doing what, where it was going, what had happened. So all of those pieces would have already come together. And when I start explaining that to the Indigenous community and bringing it back into a context about community, for community, with community, people start to resonate with what we're talking about. And then we start talking about what it is to be in the NFT community and part of this, the Twitter space, and how we are all communicating and sharing knowledge and learning from each other and growing and supporting each other. And that is the same essence of what is in Indigenous communities. So it's bringing it across into the digital world so that people still feel part of the whole community, and explaining to them, look, your piece will also generate a community and you'll be part of that community, and you can also trace that. So all those simple things in NFTs that we're all probably becoming very knowledgeable in it's explaining it into a whole different space, into the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, the Indigenous community globally, and using metaphors and that they understand and bring into space, like, and making sure that they can see what we can see.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, and I'm sorry, it's Victoria Vanessa. Vanessa, we I have a good buddy, and I'll reset the room real quick before I ask a question. This is Chimp Tank. Everybody below, please do me a favor, share this room right now. On the bottom right-hand corner, this Chimp Tank Season 1, Episode 4. We're speaking with Tim Lee, the NFTs for Good. Also talking with Vanessa Lee about a project that really is for good. I have a buddy who goes down to the Yucatan, and he visits the shaman there, and he does ayahuasca therapy. Political guy, super stressed out, and he goes down and does therapy. It's ancient techniques these guys have down in the Yucatan. It's like you said, maybe 50,000 years old. But one thing is the art there is absolutely amazing. So when you say using an artist from indigenous communities, I'm thinking probably some of the most beautiful art in the world. Can you tell us a little bit about the art and what that's going to look like? Are we looking at like hand-drawn, super top-level art? I mean, what does that look like, Tim?
It's going to be a whole variety, to be honest. I mean, the very traditional dot painting a lot of people will have seen. And there's the thing that's beautiful about Indigenous art, certainly from Australia overall, is that it's multi-layered. There are lots of cultural messages built into the art, which is absolutely beautiful. And I know Vanessa will be easier if she can talk about that in more depth. But one of the things that we're doing, the collections will also come with some hero pieces that will be one-of-ones that are produced by Indigenous artists, and these will be much more immersive as an experience. For example, Vanessa herself is an Indigenous poet. She's written some beautiful stuff. So there are a couple of pieces that we're working on where we're embedding Indigenous music, Indigenous rhythms, together with the soundscape of where the Indigenous inspiration came from. And so we're presenting a collection that will just be very different in terms of its very nature, but actually it'll be very, very powerful in many ways. And perhaps maybe Vanessa can just talk to the layers that are actually within the Indigenous art. I think she'll be better to explain that than I will.
Yeah, so with the layers, what we've been doing is the artists often want to work with, they will actually say, I'd like also to bring on this animator, and I'd also like to bring on this musician. And so we're seeing those different layers. And the other thing is that people, when they do their artwork, they have a story to each piece. It's not just a piece that's just put on paper. And I've been asking the artists when they send me through their pieces now, can they write me a small blurb, the story of the artwork, so that it becomes part of their piece. So it becomes part of that uniqueness that we see in NFTs. And that uniqueness is what is Indigenous culture. It's about that connection and what it is, connection to the environment and to the earth, and that's that human nature and all of that coming together, and that spiritual side and as well as the physical side in the environment with the stars and everything. And so it's not just about dot painting. It's also about those stories of creation and what has happened and why is this here and why is this important. And in some of the artists are quite political. Some of the artists have got their own political stance and stamp on their work, and so that's coming through as well. So the pieces are so multi-layered and unique. Unless we show you, I don't think there's much more I can say.
Yeah, it's. We're talking. We're just waiting to sort of get the final ink dry on the contract, so to speak. But there are a couple of very famous Indigenous artists that love the project so much that they want to come on board. Because they can see how empowering this could be for the Indigenous community, especially in Australia, but also globally. And I mean, back in February this year, and this is one of the key motivations that just got me thinking, was I thought, how cool would it be if we could do a fusion piece between a Native American in the Yukon, as you were saying, and an Aboriginal artist here in Australia, where they have the same sort of commitment to the environment that is around them, that respect the environment, that are part of the environment. And indeed, over the sort of the 10 months we've been working on this project, as a team, we've been talking about this, that the Indigenous communities globally are a part of the environment. They respect it, they recognize they are a custodian of their environment. In the West, we are apart from our environment. And by that, what I mean is, as individuals, and I'm just as guilty of this, we sort of say, these companies should stop putting this shit in the river and government should, regulate and that sort of thing. Whereas we're not embracing it as individuals, whereas deeply intrinsic to the community values of Indigenous communities is a total respect for the environment. And that's something that we can learn from. And let's just say, I won't say too much about it, but certainly in the next collections, there will be themes linking into that. Don't want to disclose that just yet, but there'll be themes linking into that.
Yeah, Tim, that's interesting because, a lot of these Indigenous communities depend on the environment for things like healing and things of that nature. Iron's got his hand up, and then we will get to, I think we had Young Crypto, which I think he might have got rubbed. Go ahead, Iron. What do you got? Iron is Mr. Wonderful, by the way.
Hey, Tim. Iron. So thanks for coming on. So first of all, definitely want to commend you guys on the site because it's very clear what's going on with you guys. You guys have things broken down very well, and there are examples of the artwork. I'm thinking, this is what I'm seeing here. It's very cool. I saw it earlier, so that's exciting. My question is, I guess, from my ignorance of not really understanding like what a day in the life of an Indigenous person that you're speaking of is right now. I'm trying to figure out what are they, they're putting up their own schools, so they want to integrate technology, but they still want to live where they've lived for a long time and on their land, sort of be left alone by the government, but they want to learn how to integrate more into what people are using with technology and integrate society to make money or change jobs or leave that position. I'm just trying to understand what's happening right now with an Indigenous peoples that you're explaining. So could you give me like a day in the life of type of scenario? So what are they doing for school? Are they going to school with everybody? Is it just them? They're in school by themselves, sort of because they're in a different area and they want to keep the schooling different, where they teach different things. Can you just elaborate on that?
I'll let Vanessa talk to that. She's got far more experience than I have.
So to me, what it sounds like you're talking about almost government restrictions and policies. So in Australia there is different policies in a sense for Indigenous people than there are for non-Indigenous people, and a lot of it is about keeping people oppressed. So there's things like child removal. It's a social issue, and there's a lot of things like that with social issues. So when we talk to some of these artists, they could be a product of these policies that impact on social issues of their lives. And sometimes, but the interesting thing is it doesn't come out in the artwork. It does come out in the conversation with us, and I think that's why the community engagement takes almost a week, sometimes a week and a half, before I introduce the artist to the rest of our team. And it's breaking through all of that and going through all of that and getting them focused onto what we're doing in this space as NFTs. The approach which I take with the artist is quite often about, do you want an opportunity to turn your artwork digital, which will make our culture available to the world. And the artist just looks at me and said, yes, I want to do that. And they'll tell me their experience, what they've been doing in their art space, where they've been heading, the different mediums that they've been using. And it's about drawing that out of the artist and keeping them focused on that as we work with them. And so, and I guess that comes back to that challenge question that we started this conversation with. And, you know, but the solution, like I said, there's always a solution to a challenge. And the solution in it is that, you know, is saying to them, well, this is what we're doing. This is what we're, to address the social issues, we've actually identified charitable Indigenous organisations with a charitable status, and we've made a full list of them. And if you know of any more that you would like to put forward, and where you would like some of the royalties to go to. So we're having that conversation, and then we go on to explain to them about the whole process of NFTs, where we're leaving out the middleman. And that's when we start to see, and we start to see a glow in their eyes. And then we start talking about the NFT community and that, and how this is about creating that new community and coming together in a whole digital community. And they start to glow, and the excitement starts to bubble out of people. So where they're at in that whole social inequality, and moving them out of that is the process that we undertake throughout all our community engagement. Does that answer your question?
Are they typically like, let's talk about like younger children, are they typically educated in the same schools as, let's say, you know, non quote unquote Indigenous people, or are their entire communities completely segregated because they literally live further away from city, like so far that it's completely rural, and there aren't the same type of resources?
Okay, so segregation policy ended in Australia in about 1987, and so Indigenous and non-Indigenous students can start going to the same schools. But the issue is that the Australian curriculum does not honour the Indigenous history, and that is a massive issue, because we're trying to bridge that gap of Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, and understanding that, you know, there's a 50,000-year-old culture here in this country before the convicts arrived. You know, wouldn't you rather tell that story rather than tell a story about convicts? Like, really, let's be real. And so it's about having that conversation and bringing that to the table. And it's also like, when you're talking about the schooling, there is a lot of low-level schooling, and there is low attendance at schooling. And the issue with the schools also, not just about the history lessons, but it's relation to understanding how the culture works. So there's the issue, like if somebody passes away, then there could be the process of the first stage of the death ceremony, because there's 3 stages of a death ceremony. So the first stage of a death ceremony could take 6 weeks to 12 weeks. And so, and if it depends on where the child is in the kinship system as to how many days off they'll need from school to attend the death ceremony, the first stage of the ceremony. So those things impede on a child's schooling, of course. But it's about understanding that, and then how do you get around that, and how do you work with the families and say, hey, listen, this is what we need to do to get your child back on par with the other kids at school. And so those issues do exist in Australia, and the people doing our artists that I've been talking to have been from the age about, I think the youngest one was 20. Yeah, 20, and we've got some older artists involved as well. So it's combining.
So the money's going to go directly to those artists, and then who will then sort of uplift their community by contributing. I'm just trying to understand where exactly the flow of.
Yeah, so the structure, I'll let Tim go on with the structure.
Okay, the structure basically, Iron Lotus, is that 30% go to the artists that are involved in the project. 30% go to Indigenous charities that are chosen by the artists. 30% go towards the community engagement and enhancing the Walking Between Worlds structure. The residual 5%, 2.5% is for carbon offset, because that's vitally important as a core theme for the Indigenous community. 2.5% is for regulation and legal, and 5% just for contingency. So basically 60% go to the artist and the artist community directly to reflect on the bringing the power of NFTs to community. And that's how we're structuring the split.
Right. So I saw that on the chart on your site. I guess I was just wondering, but you somewhat answered it. I mean, so the artist is gonna choose which Indigenous charities they believe matter, and you're going to make sure that's transparent and followed up on to show, hey, this particular Indigenous artist said we want to specifically give these funds this and this many, because obviously the artist is going to get X amount, and then they're going to give X amount, and they're going to say, hey, this is exactly what it went for. We chose this exact charity, and it did these exact things. That's all. I guess I was curious about.
Yeah. So just to be clearer, so when we talk to the artists, we're actually giving them a list of charities as well. So those charities include, it might be, for instance, someone might come from a community where there's high levels of domestic family violence. And so we suggest to the artists, this is in your community. Would you be interested in, and it's run by an Indigenous person or Indigenous organisation, would you be interested in putting some funding there as well? And the artists, quite often the artist will say yes to that, and then the artist will say, but I want a stipulation that there must be a men's group with a women's group set up. So those things are put in place. And when we spoke to the artist, because we've had the same conversation with the artist the other day, and he wanted to know, does he have to pay the organisation, the charity, or will that come from us at Walking Between Worlds? And so that's something we will help do with the artist. So we're not letting the artist, so the money's not going to go to the artist, and we're not relying on the artist to pass it on. We don't want the artist, one of the biggest things we've been really, really clear is that we don't want the artist to be pressured by marketing or any external issues. We just want the artist to focus on art. That's it.
Got it. Thank you.
That makes perfect sense, by the way. Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, I just want to jump in here real quick and let everybody know in the audience that towards the last 5 or 10 minutes, we will open it up. So if you guys want to come up and ask a question, go ahead and request now. I'll just kind of keep a little running list going, and then I'll bring you up last 5 or 10 minutes to ask any questions you have. Also, can you guys go up to the top of the page, and there's a tweet up there. Go ahead and tweet that out. So share this room and see if we can pump it up a little bit, and then I'll ask my question. So I'm just curious. So as far as in the Indigenous community as a whole, what's like the sentiment in regard to technology? Is it pretty much everyone is in favor of it, or is there mixed opinions? What does the community as a whole feel about it?
There is so much excitement. Honestly, there is so much excitement. Like Tim said earlier, it's interesting, when Facebook had that issue globally and people were just so annoyed with Facebook, the Indigenous people just went on, elders got on Facebook and were just using it as a way to communicate, which forced everybody else, all of us, the families and stuff, to stay on Facebook and go, oh, we have to stay on Facebook because that's the only way we could stay in contact with the elders. And so that whole, the biggest issue in Australia is making sure that you have internet, and it's getting better in regional, rural, remote Australia. But Indigenous people, all over Australia, that the love for the digital world and the internet and the computer world and everything, it just seems a lot higher, and wanting to be part of that process. The amount of people that ask us why and ring us on a regular basis just to ask questions and are skirting around the edges is far higher than the people that are actually involved with us.
Yeah, it's really.
It's interesting. Go ahead.
No. Sorry, please again.
I didn't mean to cut you off, Tim. I was just going to say, I mentioned my buddy who goes to the Yucatan, for therapy and to meet the shaman and all this stuff. I mean, it is very rural. I mean, these guys are, essentially living in the Amazon. I mean, technology is scarce. I mean, I have enough problems onboarding my buddies over 40. I can imagine that, it's going to be tough to onboard people who, are just, diving into technology. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, I mean, the conversations that I've had after Vanessa has had the initial introduction, it's 2 to 3 hours a person to get them to a point where they can really say, okay, I need to do a lot more research. And so it is, I mean, that's ultimately not scalable. We have to actually, implement structures. And that's why we're partnering with education partners and that type of thing to, instigate digital education as far as we can, very much sort of focused around the core objective where we can, so we can really sort of, help Indigenous artists focus their attention on getting their art, digital art, out there so they can sell it, and we just take care of a lot of all the background stuff for them. So yeah, they're super excited.
But there's also, when you're talking about the Indigenous people in the Amazon, there's also Indigenous people in Australia that are in a similar boat. So we also have the Ngungkari people in Central Desert in the MPY lands, and they're traditional healers. And it's interesting meeting them, and some of them are artists in their own right. And when I catch up with them, they are, they will actually say things like, they'll say to me straight out, how do I work that iPad again? And, and it's just sitting down and taking the time. And it's, I think because we are such a small population of people on such a vast piece of land, and there's so much oppression experienced from the government, when we see each other, it's not hard to ask that question. So I get it all the time. People just say, oh, Vanessa, how do I do this? Or they just say, sometimes they just call me girl, but in Aboriginal language. And so that understanding of how to bring the digital world into the oldest continuing living culture, it excites them, and it frightens them, but it depends on the age group as well. So you've got that collaboration, and we've got people sharing their knowledge in different ways.
And one thing we're trying to do is trying to create a bit of a soft branding for Vanessa here. We're talking about the idea of her being Auntie Crypto, because in Indigenous communities, aunties tend to be people in your family that are not necessarily your aunts, but they're wise and they've got wisdom. So we're going to try and see if we can do that. But it's all interesting stuff.
Yeah, we could use an Auntie Chimp, Tim. We need an Auntie Chimp for sure. Speaking of Auntie Chimps, any of you chimps have any more questions for Tim or Vanessa while we have them in line before we open it up to the public for questions? Okay, in that case, if anybody below has any questions, yeah, go ahead. Who's that? Oh,
this is Ram. Yeah, no, I think it's an amazing thing that you guys are doing. Obviously having that ability for the artists to express themselves in a way that's, something new and unique. It's not something that we've seen in the space. So I think that's a really great thing that you guys are doing. So for launch, are you guys prepared with these 10 unique and the 30, I believe, items already, or is that still being collected?
We've got we're continuing to we're continuing to work with the artists. We've got the bulk in place, but like with a lot of algorithmic areas, we want to make sure that rather than it just being cheap and nasty, we want to make sure that it's the highest quality it can be. And because we're launching sort of mid-January, so we've still got sort of 7 weeks or so, we're just deliberately building in enough cushion so that we can make sure we get the highest quality pieces out there. Because in addition to the 1,100 pieces, there'll be 10 hero pieces, and those will be put up for auction once the collection sells out, with the idea that then, you know, the people will see the quality of the artwork, they'll see the quality, they'll get an indication of who these artists are. We're going to make sure that in Twitter Spaces, in safe Twitter Spaces, we bring them up in an environment where they can feel comfortable sharing their own stories and that type of thing. So, yeah, so it's very much like anything. We want to make sure that this is the highest quality possible, so that those that choose to get behind the movement rather than just the collection, because this is a movement rather than a collection. You know, those that want to get behind the movement are the ones that, you know, that obviously for the longer term are going to sustain the whole community. So we want to make sure it's as high a quality as we can, and you know, because we're working in parallel on the 3,300 and the 5,500 pieces. You know, we're talking to extensive different levels of skill within the Indigenous community, and each of those will have a different story to tell. So sometimes we may say, well, look, hang on a second, the hero piece might fit better in collection 1 rather than collection 2, things like that. So those sort of decisions are going on, but ultimately it's about getting the best quality we can.
Very cool, Tim. Well, thank you so much for answering all of our questions. Chimps, is that all the questions you have? Iron, Mr. Wonderful, Crypto, Ram, anybody have any more questions for Tim or Vanessa before we let them go? Anybody below? Antonius, I know you came up from the crowd. Does anybody have any questions? Just so you know, Chimp Tank, Season 1, Episode 4, speaking with Tim Lee and Vanessa from the NFTs for Good project. Tim always shows up with the alpha. We really appreciate him coming tonight. We're going to open up. We're going to keep it going for an extra, you know, maybe 15 to 30 minutes. If you have a project that you'd like to come up and shill, we're going to open up the floor for you to come up and shill your project, so we can hear about your project and maybe get you on an episode of Chimp Tank. We hold the episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, where we hear from a new creator from the space every time, and they can potentially win $10,000 grant, or community help, or advertising, sponsorships. Chimps do a lot of things for a lot of people in the community. So if you'd like to shill your project, or you know somebody who has a project and they need to come in here and shill, why don't you nudge them on Twitter, shoot them a DM, maybe tag them in this space, get them up here, because the last 30 minutes we're going to open it up for other projects to come and show their projects. Tim, thank you again. It looks like Antonius has a question. Antonius, go ahead. You got your hand up.
Guys, really sorry, pushed it by accident. Amazing project, by the way, but the presentation was super clear. No questions so far. Thank you very much. Sorry, once again. Great project.
No problem.
No problem.
Thanks, Antonius.
I would just like to say just a big shout out to the Blue Chimps for hosting us tonight. I mean, it's you know, the Chimptank guys have been amazing. And what they're doing in the space, making available spaces like this for projects like ours to come up, is amazing. So absolutely, if you don't already follow them, absolutely do. I just want to say a big thank you to everybody to give us the opportunity to talk about the project. We are very passionate about it, you know, and it's one of those things that you know, we want to use the NFTs for good, and you know, with your help we can do that. So thanks again, Blue Chimps. Really appreciate the opportunity, and thank you to everybody for listening.
Yeah, thank you, Tim, so much for coming.
We'll step down and give other people a chance to come up. Okay.
All right, thank you, Tim. Appreciate
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Hey, do you want to edit the